When I got home that night, I found my parents sitting outside my own house, shivering in the cold without shoes. The lights were on inside, but the door was locked. My wife had put them out like strangers. I said nothing. But the next morning, I made one call. I've always been the kind of man who believes that if you work hard, keep your head down, and treat people right, life eventually settles into something peaceful. I built my career from nothing, took extra shifts when no one else wanted them, and slowly saved enough to buy the house we now lived in. It wasn't just a building to me. It was proof that I had done something right. When I married her, everything felt aligned. She was warm, charming, and seemed to understand the value of stability. In the beginning, she would ask about my parents, smile when I talked about them, and even suggested we invite them over someday. That version of her felt genuine, or maybe I just wanted it to be. My parents are simple people. They don't ask for much, and they've spent their entire lives making sure I never had to struggle the way they did. They live quietly, rarely visit unless invited, and always bring something small when they do. Fruit, homemade food, things like that. To me, they're not just family, they're the reason I am who I am. So when I finally had a home of my own, I wanted them to feel like it was theirs too. At first, everything seemed fine. My wife would be polite when they visited, though a little distant. I noticed it, but I told myself it was just adjustment. Not everyone grows up the same way. Not everyone understands family the same way. But small things started to change. She would make comments that sounded harmless on the surface, but carried something sharp underneath. If my parents stayed a little longer than expected, she'd say things like, "They should probably head back soon. It's getting late," even when it wasn't. If they came without calling, she'd sigh and walk into another room. One evening, while my mother was helping in the kitchen, I heard her say, "You don't have to do that. This isn't your house." The words were quiet, but they landed hard. My mother just smiled and stepped back, pretending it didn't bother her. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't worth turning into an argument. Over time, the pattern became clearer. She didn't like them being around. She never said it directly, but it showed in the way she acted, the cold tone, the forced smiles, the way she'd go silent when they entered the room. I tried to balance things, to keep peace between the two sides of my life. I'd limit visits, make sure to inform her in advance, and constantly reassure her that it wouldn't disrupt anything. Still, it never felt enough. There was always something off, something building under the surface. That night, I was running late at work. It had already been a long day, and all I wanted was to get home, eat something, and sleep. I didn't know my parents had come by. They hadn't called me, probably because they didn't want to bother me. Maybe they thought it would be a short visit. Maybe they trusted that they were welcome. When I pulled up to the house, the first thing I noticed was the porch light on. I saw them, sitting outside. My father was still on the seat, my mother beside him, both of them wrapped in silence, no jackets, no shoes, just sitting there like they didn't belong. For a second, I thought something else had happened. Maybe the door was stuck. Maybe they had stepped out for air. But when I walked closer, I saw their faces. Not angry, not even upset, just quiet. My mother tried to smile when she saw me. My father avoided eye contact. That's when I understood. I asked them what happened, but they didn't answer directly. My mother said, "It's okay, we were just leaving." That sentence told me everything. I turned toward the door, unlocked it, and brought them inside. She was sitting in the living room like nothing had happened. The TV was on, and she barely looked up when we entered. I waited for her to say something, anything, but she didn't. So I asked her, calmly, "What happened?" She shrugged and said, "They came without telling me." I wasn't comfortable. That was it. No apology, no explanation beyond that. Just a simple statement, like locking two elderly people outside was a reasonable response to discomfort. I felt something shift in that moment, but I didn't react. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just nodded, helped my parents settle in, and made sure they were okay. My mother kept trying to downplay it, saying it wasn't a big deal, that they should have called first. Even then, she was protecting the situation, trying to keep things from breaking further. I stayed quiet the rest of the night. Not because I didn't care, but because I understood that anything I said in that moment wouldn't fix what had already happened. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was silent. I sat alone in the kitchen, thinking about everything, not just what happened the night before, but all the small moments that led to it, the comments, the distance, the lack of respect. It wasn't just one incident. It was a pattern I had ignored for too long, and now it had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored anymore. I picked up my phone and made a call. It wasn't an emotional decision. It was calm, measured, and clear. I needed to understand my options, to know exactly where things stood legally and practically. The house, the accounts, everything. I had worked for years to build stability, and I wasn't going to let that foundation be disrespected or misused. The call lasted longer than I expected, but by the end of it, I knew exactly what needed to be done. Over the next few days, I didn't change my behavior outwardly. I went to work, came home, spoke normally. She acted like everything was fine, like the situation had already passed. Maybe she thought my silence meant acceptance, but behind that silence, things were moving. Papers were being prepared, details were being finalized. I wasn't acting out of anger anymore. I was acting out of clarity. When everything was ready, I sat down across from her and placed the documents on the table. She looked confused at first, then annoyed. "What is this?" she asked. I told her to read it. As she went through the pages, her expression changed. Confusion turned into disbelief, then into panic. "Wait, what is this? What are you doing?" she asked, her voice rising. I stayed calm. "I'm making things clear," I said. "You decided who belongs in this house. I'm just putting that decision into reality." She tried to argue, to explain, to say it wasn't what I thought. She said she was just uncomfortable, that it wasn't meant to go that far. But the truth was, it already had. Actions like that don't happen by accident. They come from something deeper. She started calling her parents, trying to bring them into it, hoping they could change my mind. But this wasn't about negotiation anymore. It was about boundaries that should have been respected from the beginning. I had given chances, ignored warning signs, and tried to keep peace. But peace without respect isn't real. It's just silence. Before something breaks, die. In the days that followed, the house felt different, quieter, but clearer. My parents didn't come back immediately. I think they needed time too, not just from the situation, but from the realization of what had happened. When they finally did visit again, it was different. There was no tension, no hesitation. Just a simple understanding that they were welcome, without question. Looking back, I don't think it was just about that one night. It was about everything that led up to it. The small signs we ignore often matter more than the big moments we react to. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken, tolerated things I shouldn't have, and convinced myself that it would improve on its own. But respect isn't something that grows in silence. It's something that has to be protected. That night, she locked my parents outside like they didn't belong. The next morning, I made sure it was clear who truly did. Looking back, I've realized that the biggest mistake I made wasn't trusting the wrong person. It was ignoring the small signs when they first appeared. Disrespect doesn't start with something as extreme as locking someone out of a house. It begins quietly, in little comments, in subtle actions, in moments where you feel something is wrong but choose to stay silent just to keep the peace. I told myself I was being patient, understanding, mature, but in reality, I was allowing a line to be slowly erased. The truth is, respect isn't something you negotiate when it comes to your parents. These are the people who stood by you when you had nothing, who sacrificed their comfort so you could have a better life. If someone can't respect them, they don't truly respect you either. It took me that night to fully understand that, not because of the act itself, but because of what it represented. It showed me exactly where my priorities stood in her eyes, and more importantly, where I needed to stand for myself. Silence is often misunderstood. People think staying quiet means weakness, or that it's a sign of acceptance. But sometimes silence is simply the moment before a decision is made. I didn't react that night because I didn't want to respond with anger. Anger is temporary, it fades, and often leads to regret. What I needed was clarity. I needed to step back and see the situation for what it really was, without emotion clouding my judgment. And once I saw it clearly, the decision became simple. You can love someone, you can build a life with them, you can share years together, but if respect is missing, none of it holds real value. Love without respect turns into tolerance, and tolerance eventually turns into resentment. I refused to let it reach that point. I chose to act before I became someone bitter, before I lost control over something I had worked my entire life to build. What happened after wasn't about revenge in the way most people think. It wasn't about hurting her or proving a point out of ego. It was about setting a boundary that should have been there from the beginning. It was about protecting the people who had always protected me. And sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't feel dramatic or loud. It feels calm, firm, and final. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that you should never wait for a moment like mine to understand your worth. The signs are always there. The question is whether you're willing to see them. Don't ignore discomfort just to avoid conflict. Don't justify behavior that feels wrong deep down. And most importantly, never allow anyone to make you question the place your own family holds in your life. That night, she made a decision that she thought was small, maybe even justified in her own mind. But some actions carry consequences far beyond what we expect. You don't always get a second chance to undo a moment like that. And in the end, it wasn't just about a locked door. It was about what that door represented. She chose to put my parents outside as if they didn't belong. I simply made sure that from that point on, everyone understood exactly where they did.